Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Acquire and Operate. We are acquiring small SaaS firms, fixing them up, growing them, and doing it for the love of the game, as you all know. So some, special announcements today. So as our first portfolio company transitions out of transformation state into steady state, we are going to start to point the vast majority of our energy towards acquisition number two. And with that, you're going to see a little bit of a change up in our content where the deal teardowns are going to be swapped out for acquisition concepts. So obviously we're trying to sharpen, everything across screening, diligence, valuation, and value creation playbooks. So we're going to obviously share that with you all, just as part of our ethos and building in public. But what this means is you won't see as many deal teardowns because the assumption here is that anything in our pipeline is active and we are pursuing hot and heavy, and therefore it's confidential. So acquisition concepts are going to be much more kind of the vibe here. And then obviously that'll be complemented with operating concepts for growing and transforming businesses, OKR teardowns to give you a sense of how we're hitting objectives and the stuff we're learning along the way. And then musings, which is some weirdness that's between my ears at any given point in time. And then on a quarterly basis, of course, we'll be doing the portfolio performance and strategy wraps just to give you a sense of how we're pacing and what our performance and our results are, because that's what really matters. So that's a quick one. And then secondly, if you're listening to, or if you read the Substack, we just did a total brand rehaul with the folks over at Villainy. And I'm just thrilled with the outcome there. I think this is just so much more on point, and I guess a little bit of a teaser of what's to come as we kind of level up in every way. But we've got a brand new investment criteria and select growth framework deck that's on our Substack and on our website. So if you want to peek that, there's some useful stuff, especially for those that are looking to grow because of the select growth go-to-market frameworks at the end, which we've kind of handpicked and fine-tuned over the last 5 to 10 years. Cool. So with that, let's jump in. All right. So today, an acquisition concept, you guessed it. And we're going to be defining the SaaS ecosystem and what it means to be a niche vertical to sharpen our investment precision. So I think a lot of times, I guess it's best practice generally when you're talking about anything to start with a definition of terms to make sure that everybody's speaking the same language. And obviously in SaaS, there's no shortage of acronyms. We've got the CAC to LTV for this B2B SaaS, and we selling into SMB, and it's like, whoa, what language is that? So I think when we talk about SaaS, it serves us to really define what that landscape looks like. And then similarly, when we're talking, we invest in niche vertical SaaS. It's like, all right, what does that mean? I think we all kind of conceptually understand it, but we wanted to avoid any confusion and make sure that everybody is crystal clear and on the exact same page when it comes to what we mean. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here, and we are going to be, in terms of table of contents, so we're going to be starting with a scientific concept, which is called taxonomy. And so we'll talk about that, but that basically means looking at any kind of landscape and defining it and establishing a hierarchy. So we've got SaaS segments, the subcategories, and then of course the target user bases, just to really kind of codify that and make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then we have a working definition for what a niche vertical sector is. So taking it from the top, and I was listening, I think it was All In, which is a podcast that I highly recommend. I listen to it on a weekly basis, and Chamath was talking. He's like, God, the times I've gotten rinsed the worst as an investor is when I was investing in something and I thought it was this, but it was really that. He's like, I thought it was a SaaS business, but it was really a marketplace. Or I thought it was, you can kind of extrapolate beyond that. Warren Buffett's on the record saying basically the same thing. The biggest mistakes are when I invested in this thinking it was that. And so the first thing we want to do is be crystal clear on where any acquisition target fits in the SaaS landscape. And so just to add a definition of taxonomy is a glorious exercise for achieving that. So to add a definition here, it's the science and methodology of categorizing or classifying objects, concepts, or information into hierarchical groups or types. So this is where like species fit, like we're Homo sapiens sapien. There's different kinds of derivatives of all the little lizards and fishes out there and all that stuff. So that's where kind of taxonomy was developed. And so what we did was we pulled together a pretty robust, I think there are 30 SaaS segments in there. It's a Notion table, and you can access the full table via the Substack. There's a link there. And go nuts if you have any feedback, if you think we missed anything, if there are any glaring categories like, dude, where's X, Y, and Z? Let us know. We'll add it. And ideally, this becomes kind of a library that all of us can use moving forward. But for convenience, I dropped in a flavor of 10 SaaS segments below the full Notion table, and we're going to talk through those right now. So I wanted to start, I guess the traditional, like if you think the OG kind of 3 legs of the enterprise SaaS stool have traditionally been, you got to manage your customers, which is CRM. You got to manage your books, which is accounting, ERP, and then you've got to manage your people, which is human capital management, which is kind of the new sexier term. It used to be HR tech back in my day. So you got to manage your customers, your books, and your people. And so those are the three categories that we started with. So we've got CRM, which it's just everything about your customers, right? The customer records, what's their actual profile? Who are the users? When's the last time they logged in? When's the last time we spoke to them? What are the email exchanges that we've had? Who there is part of the decision-making committee? Who do we keep? Who's the account manager on their side of the equation? All that good stuff. And then Salesforce is obviously kind of the inventor of this category. And it's kind of become the spinal cord for most firms. I think especially as SaaS and other categories have emerged. Once upon a time, it was ERP, which we'll get into because it was like manufacturing and it was a lot of business models that relied on inputs and outputs and throughput and hyper efficiency. And so that was kind of the spinal cord. But I think most of modern business now has evolved to where the CRM is really the underlying system of record for everything. And then obviously there are a million subcategories. So we've got sales automation, think outreach, Groove. There's so many now. You've got customer support or customer success. You've got Catalyst out there, groups like that. And then, of course, you have marketing automation, which is where kind of HubSpot came in, which was more about inbound marketing, which was, kind of developing a funnel online, publishing content, tracking clicks, giving away gated assets and sending follow-up email campaigns. So CRM is just this monster category. If you think about it as like the parent that has all kinds of subcategories that touch it. So this is just a small kind of sampling. And the target user base is any business that has customers. So this would be for sure horizontal SaaS for the most part, but not to say that there aren't vertical plays here. Like a CRM for a very small niche is a place where you can compete because you can assume that the horizontal players like Salesforce are trying to accommodate as many businesses as humanly possible. And that leaves space for micro SaaS players like us to come in and fine tune the CRM kind of fundamentals very, very specifically for that category. And we can assume that we're kind of left alone to acquire market share and defend it because Salesforce is like, dude, we'd rather go after the most common mid-sized businesses across the globe. So CRM is kind of a good starting point. And then we'll get into ERP. And this definition, ERP is such a beast, but this is like Oracle, SAP. And again, I'm using the most household names so that everybody can kind of relate. But this is, and I'll just read the definition, integrates various functions into one complete system to streamline processes and information across the entire organization. The suite of tools includes applications for accounting, HR, supply chain management, and more. And this is really about just managing the business's information and then ensuring cohesive information flow across various departments. So this is, kind of the data and systems and workflow brain behind big businesses. And so the subcategories here are basically any kind of derivative of financial management, supply chain operation, human resources. When I think about ERP, I just really think about kind of inputs and outputs and measuring kind of a dollar, or I guess monitoring a dollar as it goes the entire way through the business, right? So all the way from a customer paying you out to paying your employees, all that good stuff. And this is, again, kind of big enterprise tech for the most part. Supply chain management, I'm going to skip that one because those ERP and supply chain management start to get very close. And you can see, obviously, the more mature the category, like CRM, ERP, and SCM, which have been around for 20 years, the more that they've kind of broadened into other very typical business functions and departments. And so there's a lot of overlap there as they all seek to become like the de facto spinal cord for any enterprise. So let's move on to retail technology, because this is where you start to see hardware play a little bit more of an interesting role. So retail technology typically involves like point of sale, right? So when you go into a store and the cash register, right, they're no longer punching buttons and ringing the thing. It's a digital interface. And when you buy something, they're asking you for your email address because that feeds into their email marketing. Now they're going to start dripping on you. They're getting you to sign up for the loyalty program, and then they text you and you just got a star for buying your cup of coffee. So just think that anything that has to do with the transactions in kind of a physical brick and mortar context, that's going to be retail technology. And this is applicable obviously to retailers, omni-channel retail, e-commerce, and we'll talk about the distinction between retail and e-com. Because those things are increasingly a blurred line, right? I think any outfit that has a retail location, very likely you can buy stuff online. So that is becoming an increasingly blurred line because, again, this is one of the most mature categories in SaaS. And then as we get into ed tech, and I guess what you'll notice though with retail tech is now we're starting to talk verticals. Right. So now we're talking about, business to consumer transactions, people that have brick and mortar businesses. It's less like, but I guess I'm going to maybe speak out of both sides of my mouth here, but it's very likely that a retail outfit might have a CRM, but it's not as likely as a non-retail business would have point of sale. But you can start to see that there's a lot of blurred lines here. Then into ed tech. So this is really about, facilitating learning, and that's about content distribution, homework, submitting documents, logging in online, creating courses, disseminating courses, hosting courses, all that good stuff. And EdTech really popped off. Yeah, I'm going to date myself here. God, I guess it was like the 2015s, you started to see EdTech really start to pop because, schools were just on legacy technology and students were like, man, the rest of my world is on an iPad. Why am I not accessing my homework on an iPad? Why am I not submitting my homework? Why am I taking tests on paper? So there was a disconnect there because EdTech had kind of fallen behind consumer behavior and consumer tendencies. And so there was a big push. And then the challenge here was that, as you'll see, educators, schools, and universities, because something that we haven't spoken about just yet, but there's a huge distinction between private sector and public sector in terms of your ideal customer profile. And so EdTech was pretty squarely rooted. Obviously, you have Harvards and you have private schools and you have stuff like that, but the majority of the addressable market is public sector. And with that becomes big, DPS, Denver Public Schools, is a consortium and kind of a network of hundreds of schools. So if you wanted to sell them something for their students to digitally submit their homework, you had to sell at like an enterprise level. And by the way, there's a committee of 50 people that signs off on purchases over 30 grand. And so those sales cycles were really drawn out, and it was like a hard fought battle to acquire customers. And so a lot of people kind of lost enthusiasm for EdTech because they just couldn't kind of see the growth rates that you would see in the private sector. So that's that. And then on to legal tech, which is about case management, client management, sensitive documentation, e-discovery, right? Like filtering through somebody's entire email inbox just to find something that you might put up as evidence in court. You've got prop tech, which is all about real estate. So brokers want to do virtual tours so that they can better showcase homes. People want to actually bid and kind of execute the transaction and LOIs and all that other stuff. Again, typically very analog, documented processes, just asking to be digitized. So legal tech exploded. And I think we'll probably leave it there. You start to get the drift, right? You kind of have like, okay, what is like horizontal? Every business under the sun has customers. They got to manage their books. They've got employees. Okay, cool. Then you start to get into the nuance of different industry verticals like retail, where they're having face-to-face transactions. There's a point of sale type interaction that occurs. Ed tech, which is more about kind of content dissemination, submitting content, interaction. And then now we're in the public sector, right? So that ideal customer profile has evolved a lot. And then we look at legal tech and prop tech as well as just kind of, I don't want to say old wine, new bottles, but it's like you can kind of see the fundamentals of CRM, ERP, and HCM kind of bleeding into these different areas and then becoming nuanced and verticalized over time. And then, of course, where we play and what gets us excited is that even within those little categories, right, there's little niches where micro SaaS firms can be extraordinary because the folks that are trying to address the big markets have kind of neglected the smaller ones. And that's where we can live, and that's where we can achieve, $2, $3, $4 million ARR businesses that are highly profitable, and we can defend them over time. So I'll leave it at that. Let's move on now. And unfortunately, I'm going to be reading a lot for this one. So this, it's like, oh, we invest in niche vertical SaaS. It's like, oh, all right, cool. And everyone kind of just nods, and you're like, is this a niche? And it's like, yeah, that sounds small. Is this a niche? Yeah. Is this vertical? Well, kind of. It's more about a specific set of tooling for a job function, and that job function is present at all kinds of industries. So does that make it vertical? And I guess, is vertical more about just being highly defined segment versus being every business under the sun? So there's so much gray area, and there's so much, I guess, more importantly, room for interpretation, which is bad. We want objectivity, we want raw alignment, we want clarity across the entire team, because we want to make sure that we're executing on our investment thesis, which is everything that I just mentioned, right? We don't want to go invest in a CRM that tries to be everything under the sun because we don't want to compete with HubSpot and Salesforce. They'll outgun us. So back to best practice, definition of a term, to drive alignment across the team, alignment across partners that are helping with origination, and then, of course, to ensure adherence to our investment thesis, because that's where we think the opportunity is, and more importantly, that's what we've committed to with our investors. Cool. And man, I'm running out of breath. I guess Kevin's not here. He's on vacation, so unfortunately, you're stuck with me. All right, let's just do a quick sip of water here, and we'll pick up. So there's kind of five components to our definition of vertical niche SaaS. So first we break down what vertical means, and then we try to quantify what niche means. So we have a vertical focus, and I'll elaborate there. And it needs to be playing in a category that has less than 250,000 US business entities, which generally equates to less than 3% of total US businesses. We want to see a growth rate of less than 20%, and we want a high proportion of SMB and mid-market enterprises. So let's take these, and I guess at the end is moderate to high fragmentation. So some of these are a little bit redundant. That's why I kind of led with it's a working definition. A lot of this stuff smacks against like antitrust, where it's like, percentage of market share, like, is this going to generate a monopoly? So we were definitely inspired by some of that thinking. And then obviously you can kind of manipulate definitions all the time, right? So if we were looking at a retail technology that was specialized for hair salons, you could say, okay, but a lot of hair salons have makeup and nail stuff that they do, and that's more than 100. That's now a big category. Or you could be selling something that's trying to address that whole category and pitch it as just like a hair salon thing. So you got to be honest with yourself, and you need, more importantly, peers at the table and kind of indexing towards raw honesty and respecting people enough to provide a counterpoint of view where you can all kind of keep each other honest. But vertical focus. So this is SaaS solutions designed exclusively for specific industries or sectors, characterized by tailored functionalities that address unique challenges or requirements of those industries. This specialization and customization of SaaS offerings are not just niche in terms of market size or business type, they're intrinsically linked to the specific operational and strategic needs of particular sectors. So with that, sticky becomes interesting, but I guess I'll leave it at that. So that's vertical. So it's like it's catered to a specific industry in that it's not just marketed to that industry, it's kind of built for it. So it's like, hey, this is what a general customer life cycle looks like across business. Boom, this is what a customer life cycle looks like back to kind of our hair salon. Okay, it looks like this, and this is how they book clients. Okay, and this is how they follow up with them. And then you purpose build the software for it to make sure that it maps very, very neatly. So the next criteria here is less than 250,000 US business entities. And this is a function of kind of like, and again, very working, and this translates to, again, about 3% of total US businesses. So we only want to be playing in categories that are, for sure sub 10 double digits, right? We don't want to be playing in a category that has, that represents 10% of, all US businesses, because then all of a sudden you start to see the venture-backed players coming in. And then obviously if you extrapolate and you look at it globally, and that's a huge caveat, right? Right now, we're just focused on US businesses. We'll very likely expand our purview to international, but we're trying to kind of tackle one risk variable at a time and not add that in too soon. And this is basically just finding, again, density that's so light where the venture-backed players and the big tech titan incumbents aren't participating. And then next on is a growth rate of less than 20%. So this growth rate's a little bit arbitrary. We looked at a huge short list of niche sectors and kind of started to look at base rates and patterns of like, okay, for instance, our portfolio company. We all felt that was niche vertical, but the market generally agreed. How do we quantify that? And so we're very much using that as kind of a benchmark and a base rate. The growth rate is kind of interesting. So we capped it at 20%. And the main thing is that markets that are growing quickly, there's also, you can assume that they're expanding. So that's where venture folks start to lick their chops. And then there's also kind of this nuance that like, all right, if it's growing that fast, it's probably a new or emerging industry. And we hesitate to, attach our horse to that cart. I almost blew that. Hitch our horse to that wagon, because there could be, it could pop, right? Or it's not an enduring, mature category. We're not sure how sustainable it is. We don't want to go hard at a micro SaaS in the category that's exploding because we don't know if it's going to actually sustain. There's kind of two elements there, two vectors to look at the growth rate. One is if it's exploding, and first there's some kind of structural change that's driving that growth. That's interesting, but that starts to get the venture players attracted. And then there's also this kind of sense that, oh shit, it might be a bubble, or it might be something that's going to kind of grow. It's a fad. It's a point in time. It's got a lot of traction, and then boom, it pops. And you hate to be sitting there watching revenue explode, and then all of a sudden it evaporates. On to point 5, high proportion of SMB and mid-market entities. So we don't we play the long game, obviously, and our intent is to hold highly profitable assets and kind of complement those with exits and take an opportunistic posture when it comes to that. But we don't want to be selling enterprises. And I think we'll start to tinker a little bit more with sales-led growth, because there's so much leverage now with kind of the era of generative AI, where I think, one account executive can punch like 10. And I'm used to building sales organizations where, we try to have as few AEs as possible and just put as much operating leverage around them as humanly possible. But I think that ratio is just going to continue to get very, very interesting. Mark Roberge actually just did a piece on, in 5 years, go-to-market is going to be RevOps, basically, and with some human intervention, but the vast majority of the sales cycle is going to be gobbled up by generative AI, because they can recognize patterns. They're trained on a whole thing. It just makes a lot of sense. But again, how soon that's coming is a little bit TBD. But I can tell you right now, with the tooling that we have available, You don't need SDRs as much anymore. The sales processes can be kind of digital up until a very certain point. So again, it's about creating operating leverage for that human account executive to only come in at optimal times to close deals or to drive conversions. And that's before we even talk about getting users into the product, getting the adoption there, which is more about like kind of a hybrid of product-led growth and sales-led growth, which is product-led sales. But the bottom line is salespeople are going to be more high leverage than ever before. But regardless, we don't want to be selling to enterprises because those are really drawn out sales cycles. You're working with decision-making committees of 10, 15, 20 people. There's proof of concepts, multiple demos. So we want to steer clear of categories that, while they might meet the rest of our criteria, they're all organized around big enterprises. So we want to look for a high proportion of SMB and mid-market entities. And then lastly is moderate to high fragmentation. So like I guess we want to appreciate if we're late to the game. And it's like, wow, this crew came in and they just went super hard at this niche and they built every single thing that this niche ever could need. And they've got on G2, there's 2,000 reviews for all the software that is available in this category, and 1,800 of them are for this one SaaS. And it's like, oh boy, all right, we don't want to do that. We don't want to get in there and compete with them because they've already kind of entrenched themselves in the market. So we're looking for moderate to high fragmentation. And this means, call it 20 competitors in the space that all own generally equal market share, because we're super comfortable going in and competing in that context. But holy moly, that's a wrap, y'all. So I will leave it at that. Again, I think the intent here is let's get clear, let's get prescriptive on our definition of terms. What categories of SaaS exist? What's a subcategory of those big tranches? Who are their target end users? Great. We're looking at this deal. Where does that fit? Cool. We're super clear. We all agree on that. Is it a vertical niche, right? And now we have some quantifiable criteria that we can kind of run that through to reach a conclusion. And all of this is intended to be more prescriptive, more, I guess, accurate, precise with ensuring that the deals that we're looking at meet our criteria, because our criteria is a function of our investment thesis, and we've spent a long time shaping it, and we're very bullish on that. And we don't want to play somewhere, at worst, on accident that we don't belong. So much love. Thank you for joining. And one ask also, I never asked, but if this is useful to you, if you're learning something, if you're jazzed about the game, pass this along to people, get it out there. Like we're trying to be as useful as possible and kind of build a critical mass around this path as a career trajectory and as a very interesting intersection of SaaS operating, venture capital, private equity for the folks that kind of want to cut their own path. So I'll leave it at that. Much love for the love of the game, y'all. Cheers.